I want to make a few videos defending the fact that Peter is in fact the eyewitness behind the Gospel of Mark. But before we do that, I need to vindicate a friend of ours whose name is Papias. Let's get into it. If you've never heard about Papias, we're going to learn a lot about him today. He is our earliest witness that tells us about who wrote the Gospel of Mark. This is what he has to say. This also the presbyter used to say. Mark indeed, who became the interpreter of Peter, wrote accurately, as far as he remembered them, the things said or done by the Lord, but not, however, in order. For he, Mark, had neither heard the Lord, nor been his personal follower, but at a later stage, as I said, he had followed Peter, who used to adapt the teachings to the needs of the moment, but not as though he were drawing up a connected account of the oracles of the Lord, so that Mark committed no error in writing certain matters just as he remembered them, for he had only one object in view, namely to leave out nothing of the things which he heard, and to include no false statements among them. So a natural question might be coming to your mind. Why do we need to vindicate Papias? Well, a lot of modern-day scholars try to downplay how trustworthy Papias is, so we're going to learn a little bit about him before we get into his criticisms. Who is Papias? Papias was a bishop in Hierapolis who lived anywhere between 60 AD to 130 AD. According to Irenaeus, he was an ancient writer who heard John and was a companion of Polycarp, which if you don't know, Polycarp was a disciple of the Apostle John. He also tells us that Papias wrote 5 books. Eusebius says that Papias himself, in his preface, by no means claims that he had been a hearer or an eyewitness of the holy apostles, but says that he had learned the basics of the faith from those who had known them. So we see that Papias is writing very early on within the life of the church. He is a friend and companion of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John. Papias himself was not an eyewitness of Jesus or his apostles. However, he learned the faith from those who knew them. Based on Papias' testimony, we can conclude he was writing towards the end of the 1st century. He says, "Whenever anyone came who had been a follower of the elders, I asked about their words, what Peter or Andrew had said, or Philip or Thomas or James or John or Matthew or any other of the Lord's disciples, and what Aristion and the presbyter John, disciples of the Lord, were still saying. For I did not think that information from books would help me as much as the word of a living, surviving voice." Eusebius adds, Papias thus admits that he learned the words of the apostles from their followers, but says that he personally heard Aristion and John the presbyter. He often quotes them by name and includes their traditions in his writings. Papias tells us some very important details within these quotes. Firstly, that he learned the faith from those who knew the apostles, and then there were 2 apostles and followers of Jesus who were still alive, that he personally heard from and he quotes regularly in his writings. He used a proverb of the living, surviving voice, which was popular during the time for historians to talk about. They wanted people who were still alive to tell of the things that they have witnessed, rather than to read from books or hear from second or third-hand testimony. So what this tells us is, Papias valued true information, and he made sure that he was talking to the closest sources that he could possibly get to the life and ministry of Jesus. Eusebius also notes that Papias also reports certain miraculous incidents and other matters that apparently reached him by tradition. That Philip the Apostle lived in Hierapolis with his daughters has already been mentioned, but it must now be told how Papias, who knew them, heard a wonderful story from Philip's daughters. So we see here that Papias even knew the daughters of the Apostle Philip. So why do skeptics try to downplay the credibility of Papias? He seems to be very up close to the facts. He knows 2 of the apostles himself, he knows the daughters of the Apostle Philip, and he seems to be up close to the people who knew the apostles. So this isn't like 10th-hand information. He's actually getting very close to the life and ministry of Jesus. There is one quote from Eusebius that skeptics like to refer to in order to avoid what Papias has to say about the Gospel of Mark. It reads, he says that after the resurrection of the dead, there will be a 1,000-year period when the kingdom of Christ will be established on earth in material form. I suppose that he got these notions by misunderstanding the apostolic accounts, not realizing that they use mystic and symbolic language. for he was a man of very limited intelligence, as is clear from his books. So there you have it. Eusebius says that Papias is of very little intelligence. Does that give us reason to think that his tradition regarding the Gospel of Mark is untrustworthy? Or what about their second reason? They say that Papias isn't really trusted about other things, and so therefore we shouldn't trust him about this. But does that follow? I'm going to say absolutely not. These criticisms fail because Papias is not the source of the tradition he passes on. So whether or not what he passes down is trustworthy has nothing to do with whether or not he is intelligent himself, or if what he says feels strange to modern readers. Papias's explicit source for this tradition on the Gospels comes from either John the Elder or Aristion. They were apostles. They should be considered trustworthy sources. Therefore, we should judge what Papias says about the Gospels based on the trustworthiness of those he received this tradition from, not from whether or not we deem Papias to be an intelligent or trustworthy source, or what Eusebius says about his intelligence. We can also test Papias' claim with all of the internal evidence within the Gospel of Mark that Peter is in fact the eyewitness behind that Gospel. And we're going to do that next week, but today, hopefully we've established for you that Papias is a trustworthy source. He got this tradition from the apostles themselves and those who knew them. Therefore, what Eusebius says about his intelligence, or whether or not he's trustworthy about anything else, is irrelevant. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully today we have vindicated Papias for you, our earliest witness on who wrote the Gospel of Mark. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more content like this. This has been The Epitome. I'm your host, Nathan Bozeman. We'll see you around.